So it's very glad to see a lot of new and old friends' name on the audience list. To those who are new to our Safety Scientific Working Group quarterly webinar. So this webinar is presented by the members in the Safety Working Group. The working group is sponsored by biopharmaceutical section of the ASA. So this is a 2-day webinars, and we will have, this is our first day, and the second one will be on June 20th. In today's webinar, they are presented by the Benefit Risk Assessment tool through BRATS. And they from the speakers are from UCB and AstraZeneca. And following by the two presentations, we will have panel discussions. So in case if you have any questions during the presentations, please feel free to submit in the chat box. We have Susan to monitor all of those questions, and we will address your questions by the end of during the panel discussions. And you are also welcome to join the discussion. So without further ado, I will pass to Ming-Chun to give you a brief introduction of the organization.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. My name is Ming-Chun Li. I am co-leading with Brian Waterhouse of the Benefit Risk Assessment Tool Suite, BRATS. And as Michelle said, the presentation is coming from BRATS. So first of all, let me give you a big picture of the organization and what is BRATS. As Michelle mentioned, the webinar is sponsored by the ASA Biopharm Safety Working Group, and there's an official public-private partnership in place with FDA. And there are 3 work streams under the Safety Working Group and also an outreach forum, which is this one, the scientific webinar. So today's presentation is really featuring some of the initiative from the BRATS, which is one of the task force under workstream 1, interdisciplinary safety evaluation. So this is really the workstream where we have people from different functional teams, not just stats, but also clinicians, epidemiologists, etc., to work together to really ensure there is a multidisciplinary collaboration in safety evaluation through the life cycle of drug development. So the 4 sister task forces, as you can see here in the org chart, are really working together with each other, supporting the same goal. Benefit Risk Assessment Tool Suite, BRAT, is one of them. And the mission of BRAT is really to develop an open source tool for benefit risk assessment and to support the entire benefit risk assessment planning process from the beginning to the end. So in order to achieve the goal, the team is really aimed to develop an open source benefit risk assessment tool that can introduce some kind of standardization, but also flexible enough to allow different organizations to tailor to their own need. At the end of the day, we hope this tool can help to facilitate internal communication during the drug development stage, and also to facilitate communications between the organization and health authorities, and also with the payers, with patient group, and the different stakeholders. So, so that's really the goal. And how can we achieve that? So one of the initiative is we probably should learn from each other about the best practice right now. What is status quo? How people are doing in the field. So with that said in mind, we encourage our participating members to show their best practice from their organization. And that's from this initiative, we identified these 4 wonderful presentations from 4 different companies. And we're having 2 of them presenting today and another 2, as Michelle said, on June 20th. So I would really encourage all of you to join both of the webinars. And please feel free to disseminate information to your network. Again, it's free, it's to the public. The goal is to really to learn from each other. And then hopefully we can come together to develop an open source tool that can benefit the entire community. So with that said, Michelle, I'll pass that ball back to you. Thank you.
Okay, so since we have a pretty busy schedule today, so we have two presentations as mentioned before. And first we will start with AZ. So Tim, I'm going to provide an introduction of you two.
Yeah, sure. Just a quick test. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so Jean, you might want to go ahead and pull the slides up. While you're doing that, my name is Tim Sullivan. I work in the Global Patient Safety Department at AstraZeneca, and I'm involved with benefit risk as a labor of love, one of my side jobs. Jean, would you like to give a brief introduction?
Sure. Nice to meet you, everyone, and thanks for organizing this first, and then time for joining this call. So we appreciate the opportunity to give us about our work in structural benefit risk assessment. Yeah, so I am currently working in the AstraZeneca as a safety data scientist in the global patient safety. So maybe we can start here.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, nice to meet you again. So we will be discussing and presenting about structural benefit risk assessment in AstraZeneca. I think everybody can see this slide, by the way, just to make sure.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, so we will be talking about this agenda. We'll start the conversation with the conceptual aspects of our structural benefit risk assessment in AstraZeneca, and some of the framework and that methodology we developed from the regulatory recommendation. And then we also move on to the operational aspects of the structural benefit risk assessment, along with the brief examples. And we will wrap up our discussion with the lessons we have learned through this journey. And then I'm pretty sure we are going to hand over to UCB team. And then after then, we will discuss some of the questions, and then we can answer to those questions. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to you, Tim, for this part.
Okay, so we're starting off here with context and acknowledgements. So the reason that Jiyun and I are sitting here with you is that some years back we decided we need to update the AstraZeneca benefit risk framework. And I'm sure most of you have probably seen this too. There's so much information and detail about benefit risk assessment out there that it can sometimes be demoralizing, especially when you're getting started. You don't know quite where to begin. And so the purpose of our internal exercise was to simplify that detail and bring it into hopefully a logical framework. As you can see from the slide, we're very fond now of the term structured benefit risk, SBR. That's the term we use internally, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I want to be clear from the start that in no way do we consider ourselves to be the top experts in benefit risk. Like I said in introduction, Jiyun and I are consultants. We don't have dedicated full-time employees doing benefit risk, and we're here to learn, basically, and share our learnings with you. Organizationally, the process of doing benefit risk is owned by patient safety at AZ, but the overall accountability for benefit risk remains with our clinical development colleagues. And the final thing I want to do is a call out to Mike Colopy. I'm fond of telling Mike that he's been our North Star at AstraZeneca, and we appreciate his pre-competitive collaboration and expertise. Next slide. Okay, conceptual aspects. Let's keep going. So, why are we here? I suspect I'm preaching to the choir when I make this brief point. But in my view, the reason we're here is to bring transparency to the drug development and decision-making process. You could probably add clarity and simplicity to transparency as well, because if we get this right, we know that it has an impact on patients. Next slide. So I'm going to be a little provocative and tell you, in my opinion, that this single slide, as simple and as obvious as it may be, is the most important slide. And I'll tell you why I believe that. Because if you look at the title, if you believe that benefit risk is the apex or top deliverable for R&D in our industry, then you're going to take it seriously. You're going to be more likely to do it in a methodical and structured way. And if for some reason you don't believe that, then vice versa. Next slide. So one of the things we've tried to do within AZ is demystify benefit risk. Like I was saying earlier, if you're new to this and you look into it, it can really be quite overwhelming. And so for internal stakeholders that don't have time to think about it, we tried to come up with basically 3 easy steps to help them wrap their heads around it, and they're listed here. The first one for us are to define what your key clinical benefits and safety risks are. And at the risk of stating the obvious, once we've done that, this forms the core of any subsequent benefit risk analysis. And step number 2, once you get agreement on the key benefits and risk, then the somewhat harder step of agreeing on their relative importance. When we say importance, what we basically mean is weighting, and we'll talk more about that later. To agree on the relative importance as well as the uncertainty surrounding the benefits and the risk. And then the third point is to produce a standalone and really super concise assessment. So we'll revisit all of these things in the next few minutes. Next slide. So this is a simplistic overview of what we tell teams about the key benefits. One of the main ones is to aim for a low number. Most of our teams, as you can imagine, are very enthusiastic about their products. And sometimes they come with a laundry list of key benefits. But when you stop and think about it, if a developmental drug does 1 or maybe 2 things really well, that's enough. The second point is that we try to prioritize endpoints with clinical impact. So you might think the primary endpoint is always your top benefit. Our experience is that may or may not be the case. And then sometimes we also consider non-endpoint variables like quality of life, medication adherence, etc. Next slide. So that slide should read key safety risks, not benefits. Sorry. So we generally end up having more key safety risks. We tell teams to aim for about 2 to 8. That covers most of our products. One thing that's not always obvious to our teams is that these so-called key safety risks may or may not be the same as their risk management plan important risk. When we define the safety risk, we ask which ones are going to be most impactful on approvability and or uptake. And one of the struggles some teams have, particularly teams in early development, say around phase 1 or phase 2, sometimes it's not always obvious what the key risks should be. So we've come up with an internal importance calculator, and the factors that we consider, which will not surprise you, are causal potential, seriousness, patient centricity, manageability, and differentiation, meaning marketplace differentiation. Next slide. So this little cartoon is meant to reflect the working reality, I think not only for us, but many of you in industry who are involved with benefit risk. And it gets back to my original point, benefit risk is the apex deliverable of R&D or it's not. If it is the apex deliverable, then it's worth doing in a methodical and structured way. And when you try and roll this stuff out in a big organization, sometimes you get the reaction that you see on the slide. Yeah, we're already doing benefit risk. And to some extent, that's true. I'm not saying it's wrong. But my question, my challenge is, can we do it in a better way? So that's what we mean when we talk about structured benefit risk. Next slide. So within AZ, we've come up with our own working definition when we say structured benefit risk. I don't think too much here will surprise you, but let me go through it quickly. The first of all is this highly concise summary. So to put that into plain English, what our vision is we should be able to approach internal and external stakeholders with 1 or 2 pages summarizing the benefit risk. And I would like to imagine that FDA or other health authorities could start with those 1 or 2 pages, and within about 60 seconds, know the direction of travel and the key points from the sponsor's point of view. And then they could subsequently go into the detail of the submission data. The next point is to, like I said, have a concise number of the key benefits and key risks and try to avoid overlap between them so you don't get into a double counting scenario. The third point is to assess the relative importance and uncertainties surrounding these risks and benefits. The fourth bullet is to begin doing this early, to begin doing this much earlier than historically we've done in industry, starting now at first time in human. And then the final bullet is to try to adhere to the most recognized methodologies, the ones that health authorities seem to put the most focus on. Because once again, there's a huge amount of methodologies out there, and it's kind of hard to know where to start. So our approach was to look at the ones that had the most health authority commendation and feedback. Next slide. One of the things that we've found is that it's very important how you communicate benefit risk with your internal stakeholders. And so what we found is, with good intentions, a lot of our teams were producing 20 and 25 page summaries. And while we appreciate the good intentions and work, it kind of defeats the point of having this concise presentation. So what we've settled on after a couple of years experience is to have a 3-fold summary that can be landed in 1 or at most 2 pages. So the first one is the given methodology of choice, and Ji-yoon's going to talk about that. But it's not rocket science. It's things like a value tree or an effects table, etc. But in addition to that, we're beginning to ask teams to compile the so-called uncertainty table. And there's an example of that in the appendix of SIAMS 12, as some of you know. But we're finding a lot of value in focusing on an analysis of uncertainty. And then finally, we have this summary paragraph. It looks complicated, but the point of it is to very concisely correlate your benefit risk analysis with other key deliverables. So for instance, your target product profile, your probability of technical and regulatory success, your AEs of special interest. Because oftentimes we find that teams think about the benefit risk analysis in isolation, when in reality, it's intimately intertwined with all these other high-level deliverables that are very important for industry. Next slide. Ji-yoon, let's turn this section over to you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to find the speaker myself. So I'm gonna share again. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the structure benefit risk methodology and within AZ that we are currently implementing. As you can see in this slide, we have primarily three categories of methodological choices that's currently used in AZ. First of all, industry's approach to the benefit risk assessment has changed, as you know, in methodology. It used to be more descriptive or qualitative at the beginning, especially in early age, but there was a push toward incorporating fully quantitative methodology. So we break down these methodologies into three: descriptive, semi-quantitative, and then fully quantitative. Descriptive, it leans heavily on text and has limited quantitative aspects. So it is very useful in early stage of product development, especially when there is limited data available. In semi-quantitative analysis, the focus shifts more toward the quantitative methodology, and that involves elements like hazard ratio or the risk ratios. And then we recommend using formats like forest plots or effects table. And then these aspects are usually accompanied by some explanatory context. And we believe that this semi-quantitative analysis should be the go-to approach for most cases, especially for the regulatory submission. In fully quantitative analysis, the highlight is on assigning the numerical values, which is weights, on each key clinical benefits and key safety risks. Our perspective on this approach is that fully quantitative assessments can be valuable, especially in more challenging scenarios where semi-quantitative analysis falls short. However, this requires detailed and formal weighting exercises, normally involving stats or biostat experts. So these are kind of snapshot of our methodological choices. And then I'm going to go a little detail about developmental stage. I see that one of the questions that brought up in the message probably related to this this diagram that we show here. So I want to talk about like how we established structure benefit risk assessment in developmental stage. So as Tim mentioned earlier briefly, one of the core principles that define the structured benefit risk assessment is early start of the evaluation in the drug developmental process. We have learned through experience that getting the SBR underway as early as possible, such as first time in human, not only builds a solid foundation in assessment, but also it paves the way for a more robust and more efficient SBR assessment when the submission comes. So it evolves. Our approach at the AstraZeneca, it evolves around the established frameworks, as you see here. So we believe that gradual approach, starting with a lighter touch in the early stage and progressively enhancing the core company position as the project advances. So as you see here, we selected and sequenced the recommended methodologies by health authorities and make sure that by the time of the submission, the project teams have a strong foundation and well-organized analysis growing in complexity. I'm going to show you quickly just the examples of each methodology because we are running out of time. In first time in human milestone, we have tweaked the FDA BR framework, which we call the context table, as you see on the right side of the table here. What we have noticed is that in the early stage of development, it can be quite challenging to pin down the key clinical benefit and key safety risks. So we turn our attention to the context of the treatment landscape and provide a broader view of the emerging medical scientific package. This kind of information typically already exists in various resources. So to make the most of this modified FDA framework, we have put together specific instructions, and this is the example of the framework of the context table. As we reach the phase 2 ID milestone, we have another significant recommendation of the introduction of the weighting system or ranking system, which we represent in the form of weighted value tree. This approach is designed to add a new layer of clarity and depth to the analysis. In the pivotal trial phase, some of the projects may have gathered sufficient data to construct an effects table. Effects table is a widely used tool within the framework of EMA. It serves as a comprehensive resource. It contains a list of key clinical benefits and key safety risk, along with the observed or the estimated frequencies. It also provides in-depth descriptions, offering context and highlighting any important uncertainties surrounding the factors. As we approach the late stage of submitting the marketing approval, we generally consider semi-quantitative approach. At AstraZeneca, we have specific recommendations for semi-quantitative methodology, which includes the use of effects table and forest plot. But in more complex BR scenarios, we also suggest fully quantitative options like MCDA, multi-criteria decision analysis, or number needed to treat and number needed to harm. So this is kind of like algorithm that we designed to help the team, product teams to decide what kind of methodological choices that they can have. It's adaptable and flexible, and this approach ensures that we tailor our analytical methodologies to the unique characteristics and complexities of each project. I'm going to quickly provide the operational aspects of AZ, our SBR assessment, how we implement it currently. This quick diagram displays multifaceted aspects of SBR. So at AstraZeneca, global patient safety, we administer the safety strategies for investigational products. As an ongoing process, the significant to the success of the SBR is the collective commitment of all the stakeholders. Benefit risk assessment is by nature a multifaceted cross-functional artifact. So benefit risk analysis is collaborative aspect that spans various functions, including clinical development, safety, biostat, regulatory, and epidemiology functions, and etc. We have SOP that lays out mandatory versus ad hoc assessment. So for each of the milestone, we say it's mandatory. But if the new data indicate a potential change in SBR, the BR profile, or SBR is required to support the decision making, then we recommend to use the SBR assessment for ad hoc. How is SBR operate within AZ? We have SOP standards, methodological guidance, and we also training. And then we have consultation group called BRIC. And we have currently a manuscript that's published last year. I'm going to quickly go over one of the examples, successful example that
we should probably skip the example.
Okay.
In the interest
Yes.
of time, okay. I know we're a few minutes over, and it's important to me that we don't cut into Mike Phillippe's time. I'm going to go through the lessons learned super fast. So, as far as ownership of the SBR process, because it's cross-functional, it's easy to lose sight of who's taking control. Like I said, it's basically safety and clinical combined at AZ. The ranking of relative importance and the uncertainty surrounding benefits and risks causes a lot of confusion. People in industry are not used to thinking this way. But if they're not trained to, we're not going to be able to get benefit risk right. I already mentioned that despite our guidance, people tend to still produce a lot of long, low-value summaries. So in our view, there needs to be more education in getting this down to 1 or 2 pages. I've already mentioned that teams, particularly in early phase, have trouble determining the key safety risks. We've come up with our own internal importance calculator for that. There was a tendency for us early on to have an over-complex internal sign-off. We wanted to take this seriously, and it went through layers of people up to the chief medical office, and that just didn't turn out to be practical. So we're going to limit it now to the safety and clinical VPs. This might not impact people at FDA, but in industry, you know that we're always under time pressure when we close out our trials, and we rely on the so-called high-level results. The benefit risk data is not necessarily included in that, believe it or not. So we have to change our processes to make sure that happens. The next bullet, there's a big workload here for products with a lot of combination products. Some of our oncology drugs are in up to 10 different combinations. So in that situation, we may have to relax our demands a little bit just for pragmatic reasons. Another challenge is we have a lot of accelerated programs, oncology in particular, where they combine phase 2 and 3. So Ji-Yoon presented our preferred methodology,
No
but
podemos ir,
sometimes
hay
we
que
have to
sacarle.
be. Sometimes
Está
we have to
llorando,
be
está.
flexible. Sorry. Okay. The final couple of points, like Ji-Yoon said, we have an internal consult group, but what we find is people usually come to us not with strategic questions, but with questions on whether they're following the SOP correctly. We want to have it the other way around. And then finally, we were not able to incorporate patient-centric benefit risk into our framework. It was just too much to chew. But Ji-Yoon is leading a group to help us begin to do that, and you can probably look forward to a manuscript from her in the next year or 2. So sorry to run over. Thanks for your patience.
So this is all we have, and then probably we can turn over to Mike and Chen.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, I'm looking to see where I can take control. I'm going to go ahead and go to my slides. You can tell me if I have control. Can you see it?
No.
No? Oh, let me go to view. I'm sorry about that. I saw it before and then I went to. I'm sorry, can somebody tell me where?
Mike, if you go to more, next to apps down at the bottom of the screen, the three dots there.
Do you see the share screen option?
Yes, so I mean, if you click on more, there is a share screen underneath that. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a hotkey, or else I'd tell you what the hotkey was.
I do see a hotkey on mine, a green share screen. Mike, do you see that on yours?
Oh, there it is. Okay, great.
Thank you,
Okay.
Cindy.
Okay, can you see my slides now? I'll try
Yep.
to go into. Great. That should be full screen. Okay. Okay, wonderful. Does that look presentable?
Mike, I think you need to make your screen larger with the square in the top. We're seeing part of your
Oh.
part of your Outlook.
How's that?
That's good.
Does that look good, Cindy?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you. So today we're presenting the UCB benefit risk dashboard, and this is the creation of Chen, Lovemore, Kava, and myself. Here's our disclaimer. And I'm going to be skipping the brief history of visualization. You will be getting, you can request a copy of these slides and see anything that I leave out. And I've also completed the notes page so that anything I say is in the notes. Then we're going to talk about design criteria and considerations. Then Chen's going to be covering the benefit dashboard itself. And then we're going to talk about where we're going from here. So please, if you get these slides, go ahead and check those out. I'm going to go right to the design criteria. So before we started creating the dashboard, we specified our design criteria. So we first considered the decision milestones laid out in our benefit risk decision process. And decisions have always required evidence and judgment, but here we make value judgments explicit and transparent. And if you're familiar with the BRAT tool, you know it displays proportions, which works for adverse events, but it does not accommodate common efficacy metrics like means. And as statisticians, we know we lose information by dichotomizing continuous data. Then lastly, the dashboard is a communication tool. It does not make decisions for you. The trade-off between your drug and the standard of care might be acceptable for some patients, but not others. Here is a list of our design considerations for how a dashboard will fit into your organization. Making the appropriate selections will require a cross-department approach, and addressing these considerations will make your dashboard sustainable. So take user. The choice of users can depend on who has direct access to the source data. The access can be determined whether the app is on your laptop or on a server. Then GXP status is a huge consideration because GXP compliant outputs need extensive validation and quality assurance. Data processing. Do you want your dashboard to visualize pre-processed data or perform analyses too? Data entry is a major consideration. For treatment level assessments, we started with a hand-entered effects table, which we plan to automate later. For patient level assessments, we'll upload ADAMS data. Assessment type. Visualizing qualitative assessments of clinical evidence was straightforward. Quantitative assessments require a lot of team discussion and value judgment before they can be visualized. Validation should be one of your first, not last considerations. There are different types of validations, and they require skills beyond being a good programmer. The goal of the dashboard is to aid your decision-making, whether the benefits exceed the risks. That question is actually a culmination of several sub-questions. Which outcomes most impact your decisions? Does your therapy fall inside the acceptance region? Are the trade-offs between the benefits and risks homogeneous across studies, doses, and subgroups? And are the patients who experience the most benefit and experience the most risk the same patients? With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chen. Chen, I'll progress your slides for you.
Okay.
And we'll see how Chen and Lovemore were able to satisfy all of our design criteria and be able to answer these types of questions.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah. So for our benefit risk visualization dashboard, we planned 3 implementation phases. Phase 1, we include qualitative assessments of treatment level data, which is to visualize benefit risk. Sorry? Okay. Which is to visualize benefit risk trade-offs between treatments. The common graph types include value tree, effects table, dot forest plot, etc. And in phase 2, we include qualitative assessments of patient-level data, which is to assess associations between pairs of benefit risk outcomes. The common graph types include parallelogram, scatter plot, etc. And in phase 3, we include quantitative assessments, which will integrate clinical evidence with value judgment for the benefit risk assessment. And in this phase, we will cover approaches like MCDA and some Bayesian approaches. So currently we have completed phase 1 and we are in the middle of phase 2. Next slide, please. This is the landing page of our treatment level dashboard. We remind the user that this dashboard is for exploratory purposes only and not for GXP use. On the top, each tab represents one graph type that I will introduce immediately. Next slide, please. This is the template for the statistical effects table that will be uploaded to the dashboard as input datasets. It has many columns, but not all columns are required for every situation. So the first few columns describe the characteristics of the outcome. And then we have columns describing the treatment response for the active treatment. And we also have columns describing the treatment effects for the comparator treatment. We have columns describing the treatment differences of the two. So depending on the type of the outcome, some of the columns are required and some are not. And finally, we have columns for documentation. Next slide, please. Once you upload the effects table into the dashboard, you will get a value tree. The value tree displays the selected outcomes for the benefit risk assessment and also the statistical measures used for each outcome. Similar outcomes can be grouped together as grouped outcomes. In the effects table, you can specify whether an outcome is an identified or a potential outcome. And in the sidebar panel, you have the option to select whether you want to show the potential outcomes together with the identified outcomes, or you want to prune them from the tree. Next slide, please. Once we have the value tree, we can get a dot forest plot with the treatment level data. Here, this is a screenshot of the sidebar panel for the selections. For example, you can select which drugs you want to display. You can select the benefit and risk outcomes of interest. You can select subgroup data to display. You can also select the statistical measures for the benefit and risk outcomes. You can decide whether you want to use confidence intervals supplied in the effects table or let the app calculate them for you. And then you also have the option to use either fixed or free range access skills. Next slide, please. And here is how the dot forest plot looks like. It separates the displays for benefit and risk outcomes, as well as continuous and binary outcomes. Since different type of outcomes might use different statistics and have different scales. So on the left, you see the dot plot, which displays the treatment response for the active and comparator treatment. And on the right side, you have the forest plot, which displays the treatment difference with 95% confidence intervals. Next slide, please. So here is the screenshot for the sidebar panel for the trade-off plot. It has similar options as the forest plot, but additionally, it provides the option to specify the benefit risk trade-off thresholds, which can come from QOL opinions or patient preference studies. Next slide, please. So here is how a trade-off plot looks like. It uses the same data as the dot forest plot, but displays in a different way. It displays one benefit and one risk outcome at a time. In this example, we plotted data for 4 drugs on the market that we want to compete with. And for each of the cross, the dot in the middle represents the treatment difference of a drug versus placebo. And then the horizontal line represents the confidence interval for the benefit outcome, and the vertical line represents the confidence interval for the risk outcome. So the trade-off plot allows an easy comparison of benefit and risk outcomes simultaneously among different drugs. So you may have a drug that have low benefit and low risk, which might be more preferable to patients with less severe disease. And you may also have a drug with high benefit and high risk, which might be more preferable to patients with more severe disease. And then the minimum acceptable benefit and maximum acceptable risk that you specified in the sidebar panel can be plotted in the graph. You can also add the trade-off thresholds to the graph, which defines a white acceptance region and a gray unaccepted region. So in this example, all 4 hypothetical drugs are already on the market, so they should all fall in the white acceptance region. So you can have this exercise before you have your data for your investigational drug, and then later you can add data for your investigational drug to the plot to see where it sits in the graph and how it competes with the other competitor drugs. Next slide, please. So this is the contour plot, which displays the confidence level that the treatment effect for the benefit exceeds the minimum acceptable benefit, and the treatment effect for the risk does not exceed the maximum acceptable risk. So in the dashboard, the graph is interactive, so that when you hover over the plot, you will see the confidence level displayed in the screen. So the counterplot was first introduced by Shakespeare in his publication in Lancet 2001. Next slide, please. So the above are the graph types we included in the treatment level dashboard. And we also developed some prototypes for patient level assessments, which we will incorporate into our dashboard in the next phase. So here is a parallelogram, which displays the correlation between each pair of benefit and risk outcomes. The dark red represents a high positive correlation, and the dark blue represents a high negative correlation. So from the parallelogram, you can see whether two selected benefit risk outcomes are highly correlated, or whether a pair of benefit and risk outcome is highly correlated. Next slide, please. This is another graph that visualizes patient level data. So here in this graph, the blue line represents the cumulative access number of subjects with events for the benefit outcome, and the red line represents the same for the risk outcome. This plot allows you to assess whether your benefit is sustainable over time and whether your risk increases with cumulative exposure. In this example, it is the best scenario where the benefit increases with cumulative exposure and the risk kind of remains stable over time. Next slide, please. This is a stacked bar chart for placebo, low dose, and high dose. This one displays the distribution of 5 composite benefit risk outcomes, which were first defined by Johnston in her paper. So since the outcome is composite benefit risk outcome, it allows to assess the benefit and risk outcomes simultaneously over time. So I think that's what I have, and I will hand over back to Mike again to discuss the next steps.
Thank you, Chen. So our next steps, after auto-generating our effects table for the treatment level assessments and implementing our patient level assessments, we're going to work on phase 3, our quantitative assessments. Sorry, it's there we go. Okay, I love this plot. Okay, this is a scatter plot of individual patients, displaying the percentage of patients who fall in the acceptance region below the diagonal threshold. Stuart Pocock's publication explains how to generate these predicted values. So as you can see here, you want to be in this acceptance region down here, and you can see the scatter in patients and see how much homogeneity you have across patients. Multi-criteria decision analysis. I did this using HighView 3, but there are available R programs. And we'd like to see MCDA used for both a planning and assessment benefit risk. As a planning tool, project teams will consider the relative importance or weights of the outcomes earlier in development. And then in summary, you can start planning what you want to get out of your dashboard and see how it should fit into your organization very early, even before you start collecting your own data. You should take full advantage of the benefit risk methods for integrating medical judgment with your clinical evidence. And finally, to make your dashboard sustainable, get help from software developers who know how to automate it its updates and make the software perform as expected. So that's the close of our presentation. And let's see, I think we're ready for questions, but I do like to acknowledge two people. We first met Tim Sullivan when he participated in the ASA's industry survey. And now Martin Gable has that published in the DIA journal. And the wonderful thing about that industry survey is the questionnaire. You can use it to basically take inventory of your own company's processes. Then the second thing is our co-developer for the dashboard, Levmore Gakava, also has a initiative where he's continuing to develop benefit risk graphs on the GitHub site. And Levmore, if you're on, do you have any comment on that?
Thank you very much, Mike, and everyone online. We are in the process of, first of all, creating the benefit risk figures that were in our publication. And we are hoping to get that ready to the public at the third quarter. And then we're hoping that will be a platform to engage other people across the industry so that we can create visualization. Like if someone has a description, an idea, or a specification of what they want to do, they can just provide it, and that can be a site for us to be able to develop that. And I just wanted to thank you, Mike, for your belief in turning us into decision scientists, and also to thank Cindy for the opportunity to work in this area. Thank you.
Okay, so Michelle, I think it's back to you.
Hi, Mike. This is Susan Mayo.
Oh, hi, Susan.
Hi. Yeah, so Michelle might be back, but I know she had to step away for a few minutes. Our next section here will be a panel discussion. We've heard from Tim Sullivan. And Tim, I've got you first on the list here. First of all, can you see the agenda slide? Is that showing on the screen?
See it.
Okay, great. Tim, you may have some, I expect you probably have some more comments to make, but you did an excellent job of explaining the reasoning behind why you see this as important and what your organization is doing. Shall we start first with Rob Maswa from GSK, head of the risk management and benefit risk evaluation group there, and then Tim, you may have some follow-on comments. I also wanted to give opportunity for James Higginson, who also is from GSK, but in addition to that, he is in the pharmacovigilance area, but also is a co-leader of a sister organization or a sister task of this working group called Benefit Risk, BRAP, and it has to do with benefit risk planning. So Rob, comments from you? And sorry, these are questions for the panel. And I've encouraged these three panelists to select one or more questions here to comment on. Rob, if you're on, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we're getting a bit of an echo.
Susan, just a quick response. We couldn't wait for the FDA to come out with their guidance document because it tells our leadership teams that this is something that we need to resource. And because we have all the methods, we have great ideas of what to do, but it takes resources. And so the FDA guidance basically promotes that. And the guidance basically starts off saying, we want you to start off with your qualitative assessments, like the forest plot and effects table. And then if you can't answer the questions of whether the benefits exceed the risk, then you go on to do the more elaborate quantitative assessments. And so I think that's the kind of path that we're taking.
Thanks for that context, Mike. Rob, try again, see if the technical detail is
Sorry about that. Can you hear me any better now?
Yes, very good.
Thank you. Sorry, James and I are in the same room. We thought we'd be efficient, and obviously that kind of ends up being thrown in our faces a bit. But thank you very much for allowing us to speak. So it's first of all, I want to acknowledge how AZ and UCB teams have done such a fantastic job in packaging this structured frameworks and in different ways, whether it's the kind of the life cycle proposal from AZ and the visualization proposal. So I want to highlight on that first question around alignment and some of the introductions of new ideas. I think AZ team have really distilled the complexities of especially on a surface level, I suppose, complexities of benefit risk assessment into really easy implementable simple steps that are really practical enhancements to what was proposed through CIOMS 12 and the FDA guidance. And some of those included kind of adding the weighting, for example, on the value trees, which I know is obviously a subjective addition, but ultimately, and regardless of whether there's a transition towards a quantitative assessment or not, having an opportunity to add weight to the different key benefits and key risks on the value tree is another opportunity for the key members of the team to just be around and anchor around a specific document or a specific framework that allows that discussion and allows the clinical judgment to really be brought into the framework. So I thought that was very valuable and something that wasn't really communicated in the CIOMS 12 paper. I like the kind of adapting of the FDA framework as well, the kind of having the uncertainties as a separate column. I think sometimes when teams try and populate the FDA framework, the uncertainties can be lost with the evidence, as opposed to kind of adding its own weight, I suppose, for want of a better term, through a separate column. And finally, another point I want to also highlight is the focus on key risks broadly and not focusing on, let's say, the important risks from a risk management RMP perspective only. And I think CIOMS 12 could have done a little bit better in terms of not fully focusing on risks from an importance perspective, from and aligning with the RMP, because especially early on, first in human, teams aren't able to determine what an important risk is. But actually, if we take one level back and understand what are those, let's say, broader pool of risks that we want to understand, the 2 to 8, as Tim was suggesting, and then allow the teams through the life cycle to focus on the key important risk and use that important definition later on in the, let's say, from a submission stages. So I want to just kind of reiterate my congratulations to the team. I think it's a great framework and something that definitely here at GSK will be looking to learn from. Susan, did you want me to?
Yeah. So thank you very much for that, Rob. I'm just thinking about the time. So Tim or others on the who gave presentations, do you have responses to Rob?
I would like to thank Rob for the feedback, and I have a few other observations, but I think we have another GSK colleague on the line who might have a comment.
Thank you, Tim. James?
Yeah, no, thanks. Great presentations, both of them, and I would reiterate Rob's point, particularly around the AZ, that as stated, there's an overwhelming amount of information there, and it's a great task to distill that down into a practical, implementable process. And I think that was a wonderful publication. I think that would help other pharma companies, biotechs, to implement their own processes. So that's very welcome. And the visualizations as well, you know, they really help to articulate in a one-pager the benefit risk perspective. And it looks as though UCB system would enable teams to, with advice from statisticians, to sort of generate their own visualizations in a relatively simple manner. So I think that was very welcome as well. Me and Rob did consider these questions. So for example, for question 2, we thought that in terms of the FDA review of NDA or BLA, the sort of position around benefit risk that's articulated in the clinical overview, because there's been such emphasis during the development cycle that the quality of that presentation should increase. The use of visualization should enable reviewers to quickly get an overall perspective. AstraZeneca also discussed their kind of high-level, succinct presentation of benefit risk, the one-pager. Again, that will be useful to reviewers to get a very overarching perspective before they drill down into the specifics. I think we felt that during the kind of review, or prior to the actual submission, you know, there's a lot of emphasis now on at key stages. So, for example, end of phase 2 meeting, having those discussions with regulators, including a benefit risk discussion. So it wouldn't necessarily be brand new to the FDA when they see the submission. There's an opportunity to design the pivotal trials in the best way to ensure that the endpoints are appropriate and would inform that submission benefit risk assessments. So there's opportunity through the review cycle, but just that overall increased emphasis throughout the product life cycle, the focus on discussion between clinical and the safety departments would increase the quality and should ultimately result in better clinical overviews when they arrive for regulatory review. So I think that those are some of the key points we had around question 2. So, but thanks to both presenters, they were great presentations.
Thank you, Rob. I wonder, do you have any comments on behalf of BRATS about these presentations? Maybe a separate than these 5 questions. Just giving you an opportunity as a from the sister task force from BRATS. Sorry, Rob, did you hear the question? I'm sorry, James, did you hear the question? So I'm not sure why.
You know, Susan, one of the things several years ago, the FDA shared their benefit risk framework, and they said, come back and sponsors and tell us what you're doing with this. And this is a response to that. Our work does follow the benefit risk framework put out by the FDA. Then the FDA comes out with their guidance document, and they're saying, you know, nobody embraces good decision making better than the FDA, and they're saying, let's talk about these uncertainties that are in the framework. And the response to that is the best time to talk about uncertainties is when you're planning your benefit risk, not when you're reporting it. When you're reporting it, it's a little bit late to fix those uncertainties. So the thing with the benefit risk planning is you say, here are the potential uncertainties. Let's collect the right data. Let's put this in a plan. Let's share that plan with the FDA so that we're all on the same page for our phase 3 program. And then when it comes time to put those uncertainties into the benefit risk framework, hopefully you don't have as much to say.
Thank you, Mike. I wanted to offer apologies to James if I put you on the spot. Shall we go back to the questions? So Rob has had an opportunity to respond to a question, and James had. I want to leave a few minutes at the end for some of the questions that came in the Q&A. Oh, James, are you back?
Yeah, sorry, Susan. I think just due to the meeting venue, we're having some problems with the sound. So actually, I could see you were speaking, but we couldn't hear you. That's why I didn't respond. So apologies for that.
Oh, okay. Would you like to say something about your thoughts from the BRAP viewpoint?
Yeah, so from a BRAP perspective, a lot of these points resonate with us from the industry survey and the KOL interviews we did. That I think, as Mike's mentioned, there should be planning in place so that you have a early understanding of the benefit risk profile, and as Mike says, you plan to address the uncertainties to better characterize the risks, to really ensure you've got the appropriate endpoints in place to understand the benefits, and that you can plan those regulatory interactions. So there's much more emphasis on the assessment throughout the product life cycle, and also on the planning for that, so that ultimately, when you arrive at the submission time point, it's too late, as Mike says, to address any outstanding issues then. Whereas if you're really focusing on proactive planning, you have time during the product life cycle to address uncertainties and reduce those to the extent possible, and ensure that the risks are as well understood as they can be, and that you've really interrogated the benefit, and if there's any novel endpoints, that you have regulatory buy-in to those along the way. The BRAT group itself is working on a manuscript, or points to consider document, where we'll cover a number of principles that are important to consider during the benefit risk planning process, and that will be our next deliverable. So that's just an overview and summary. Apologies I couldn't give it before, it's just the sound issues, but I hope that was sufficient. Thank you.
I'm glad that was the only reason. Someone needs to go on mute, please. Make a side conversation. Thank you. Tim, would you like to take a crack at the questions, please?
Well, thank you. I've got a feeling that I should probably be answering some of the questions that came up in chat, but
okay, you're welcome to choose whichever you want.
Well, I do have one question. I mean, let's face it, it's not every day I get to speak with FDA colleagues and ask their advice. So my one question would be this. This is for FDA colleagues. Just at a high level, when you're doing the benefit risk reviews, what do you see that's working well, and what do you see where things need to be better?
Well, so I guess I am the FDA representative here. I can offer you my personal opinion, but I'm not really speaking from the point of view of FDA. So my personal opinion, having been in an organization, a sponsor organization, working for about 5 years in this area, I've seen the value as you've described today. And what I see at FDA is that there is a very strong commitment to both safety and to benefit risk. It comes through in the structured text that we have in every one of our NDA and BLA reviews. What I think we can do better at is to consider in our review what our thoughts are from an FDA perspective on the planning end of things. and there are some pilots that I'm aware of that have been working in that area. And I think we are, I wasn't prepared to answer this question. So I'll just say there are folks that, including someone who will be a discussant at our next webinar in June, whose CEDAR speaker request went in recently. So we hope to announce that in the next couple of weeks, who can speak more about that and has been in a situation where I think those edge cases where whether benefits outweigh risks are where benefit risk assessment can be especially helpful for decision making on both sides, both regulator and sponsor. So I hope we can have someone who can say a little more on that as well. That's from CEDAR. We also have a discussant scheduled from CBER and hope to say more there. I see this working group as a way that we can also have a discussion at a high level about these topics. And so appreciate you all coming today. I hope that addresses your question, Tim.
Thank you.
Discussants, we have about 5 minutes left before we turn it over to Brian Waterhouse, the BRATS co-lead, who will summarize. Do you have other compelling questions here, or shall we go to the questions in the chat?
We've got some comments, questions, but I know there's a lot of questions in the chat as well. So happy to maneuver. I think maybe just to add one point, that the Apex deliverable kind of mindset from AZ was really fascinating and interesting, and also removes the over reliance on other deliverables in development, such as, let's say, some sponsors may have a developmental RMP or a developmental risk management strategy, which is very safety lopsided, as opposed to maybe anchoring around something that's a bit more contextualized. So just another comment to add, but I know there's a lot of questions, so happy to just defer to those. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is Brian. So if you just give me a minute at the end, that would be sufficient. I'd rather us spend the time on the content and the questions.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So as the moderator, I just wanted to take a question that I thought was particularly compelling for the panel to consider, the panel and speakers to consider, from Benjamin Knopfrel. I have a question to the fully quantitative version. Methods used are, for example, MCDA or SMAA. Most companies do not like the idea to have an outcome of, for example, 3.7 that tells us that benefits outweigh risks. It's always depending on the weighting. From a business perspective, most would adjust the weighting in a way that benefits outweigh the risks. I guess also regulators will think of it in a similar way, like p-value fishing. So how can quantitative methods be used in reality?
Well,
Thank
if
you
I
for the
can
question, Benjamin.
if I can jump in, the beauty of MCDA and SMAA is that these weights can be taken from a patient preference study of, say, 300 patients. So it's not just one person's opinion. It can have come from a very rigorously controlled experiment like DCE. The other thing I like about MCDA is you can do a sensitivity analysis. So you sit there and say, these weights can be a little bit this way or a little bit that way. You can change those weights to see at what point does it flip your decision in favor of, say, the other treatment. And then you can say, is that even realistic to alter weights that much in order for the decision to flip the other direction? So there's a lot there. And so it isn't just taking somebody's opinion and running with it.
I would agree with Mike, and I would build a little bit on what Mike said. So first of all, I fully acknowledge the question. It's a question everybody has. They should have it, their right to do so. But if you stop and think about it, we're almost always making medical value judgments that are subjective, whether you're doing MCDA or not. And the beauty of MCDA is that you're making these value judgments transparent. So once again, think about why we're talking about structured benefit risk. Is it just a navel-gazing exercise? In my view, no. The purpose is to bring transparency to the decision-making. So I acknowledge the limitations when you do a subjective weighting exercise, but at least you're being transparent about it. So then the various stakeholders can assess and critique your advocacy position.
Thank you, Tim. And I might just add, if there's a way for the process to be transparent, that might be helpful too.
That's what your benefit risk assessment plan is for, is you document all your processes, how your decisions were actually made. How did you even choose the key outcomes? And so that's all documented. It's adding to what Tim was saying about transparency.
Thank you. Thank you for addressing that question, Mike. Doug Silverstein asked the question, for all speakers, could you please indicate if benefit risk assessment is performed at each stage of product development? And if yes, the key points that differ. And then he added that I believe this is in AZ's presentation. Slide 15 shows BRA is performed at each stage, but is BRA also performed during preclinical product development?
Since there is an AZ focus to that question, I'll try and give a brief answer first, and others can improve upon it. But to the last part, no, we're not doing structured benefit risk preclinically. Well, where we started is at first time in human. And like Ji-Yoon was saying, we've tried to do it in a way that accomplishes a couple of purposes. We want to incorporate recognized and recommended health authority frameworks. So we've modified FDA's table, we're using the effects table. Everybody agrees to the value tree. And we're trying to do it in an organic and pragmatic way because everybody in industry knows how difficult it is to get resources to do anything. And the structured benefit risk is an additional piece of work. So we think by applying a light touch early on in phase 1 and phase 2, it continues to be value added while still doable.
Thank you. Realizing we have only 4 minutes left, can you comment briefly? I think this question is focused. This is from Mador for Tim and June. Can you comment briefly on the practical challenges you face while articulating the benefit risk in 1 to 2 pages? Considering that we all love details.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Like I indicated, it's one of our lessons. It's a struggle because I don't think in general, first of all, a lot of people have the trouble wrapping their head around benefit risk to start with, for reasons I described earlier. And even once you've done it, it's not always easy to know how to communicate it quickly. I personally keep reiterating the goal to have it be ruthlessly concise. We as sponsors should be able to understand our data and communicate it in a concise way. So when we hand it to a medical reviewer, within 60 seconds, you should see the entire direction of travel and our narrative. And then you can dive into the details and see if you agree or not. The lesson that we've learned to keep it concise is to give teams a template and to give them education. What we don't want to have is 25-page mini novels. What we do want to have is a specific methodology, 1 page, and then an assessment of uncertainty, and then how does benefit risk correlate to things like the target product profile, AEs of special interest, etc. So that's how we're trying.
Very good. And GSK discussants, do you have any parting comments before we turn it to Brian for a summary?
No, I don't think we had any kind of major additional comments to add. Thank you.
Okay. All right, over to you, Brian.
All right, thank you. So as mentioned previously, right, I'm the co-lead of the BRATS task force, and I want to just thank again Tim and Jae-yoon for their presentation on the AstraZeneca structured benefit risk, as well as Mike and Chen for their presentation of the UCB dashboard, as well as the discussants Rob, James, Tim, and special guest Susan, who jumped in as an FDA discussant. I also want to remind people of the upcoming June 20th second part of this, where we'll be seeing another benefit risk assessment tool suite presented by Martin Gebel from Bayer, as well as the GSK quantitative benefit risk assessment example from Danae Williams from GSK, and that is June 20th at 11 o'clock, same time, just different date. So thank you everybody for coming today. Really wonderful discussions and very much appreciative. Have a good day.
Thank you, organizers.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.